The air in the sump hollows of Hive Tertius was a choking slurry of ash and despair, thick enough to coat Lyra's throat with every breath. She knelt in the refuse, her calloused hands sifting through the detritus of a broken world. Shattered ceramite, rusted bolts, the occasional bone picked clean by scavengers. The dim flicker of a failing lumen overhead cast jagged shadows across the Underhive's refuse pits, where she worked alongside her son, Terran, to salvage anything the upper spires might deem valuable. Once, Lyra had been a weaver in the mid-hive, crafting banners for the ecclesiarchy's endless sermons, her fingers nimble with thread and faith. Now, her hands bled from jagged metal, and her faith was as frayed as the rags she wore. The Imperium's promises of salvation felt like lies whispered to a dying child, and Hive Tertius was dying, its manufactorums silent, its streets choked with the desperate and the damned. Terran, barely 10, hummed a hymn to the Emperor as he worked, his voice a fragile thread of hope in the darkness. Lyra's heart ached at the sound, a reminder of the cathedral spires where she'd once knelt, praying for a better life. She glanced at him, his thin frame hunched over a pile of debris, his eyes bright with the innocence she'd lost years ago. "Keep your hands quick, Terran," she said, her voice hoarse from the acrid air. "The gangs'll be back soon." The Ashborn Reavers had swept through the sump 2 days prior, their promethium torches leaving blackened scars on the walls and bodies in their wake. Lyra had hidden Terran beneath a collapsed hab panel, whispering prayers she no longer believed in as the screams echoed. Her fingers brushed something smooth and warm amidst the cold refuse, a metallic object, half buried in ash. She tugged it free, revealing a tarnished Aquila pendant, its twin-headed eagle gleaming faintly despite the grime. It was heavier than it should have been, its edges worn but unyielding, as if it had endured centuries of neglect yet refused to break. Lyra's breath caught. Such relics were rare in the Underhive, where even devotion was scavenged for profit. She turned it over, expecting the familiar engravings of imperial scripture, but found only faint, unfamiliar markings etched into the wings, spirals that seemed to shift when she tilted the pendant in the dim light. "Mother, what's that?" Terran's voice broke her trance. He leaned close, his dirt-streaked face alight with curiosity. Lyra hesitated, the pendant's warmth pulsing against her palm like a heartbeat. "Just a trinket," she lied, tucking it into her tattered coat. "Keep working." But the pendant's heat lingered, seeping into her chest, and with it came a whisper, not a sound, but a feeling, a promise of safety, of salvation for her and Terran. It was absurd, yet the thought clung to her like damp rot, stirring memories of the ecclesiarchy's sermons about the Emperor's eternal protection. That night, in the hollowed-out shell of their hab, Lyra sat by Terran as he slept, the pendant clutched in her hand. The sump's distant groans and the occasional crack of gunfire were the only sounds, but the pendant's warmth felt like a shield against the chaos. She traced its edges, the strange markings catching her eye again. They seemed to writhe, though she told herself it was a trick of the flickering chem lamp. Terran stirred, muttering in his sleep, words that chilled her blood. "He sees us, the winged shadow. He'll save us." His voice was not his own, too deep, too certain for a child. Lyra's grip tightened on the pendant, its warmth now scalding, yet she couldn't let go. She tried to pray, mouthing the litany of faith, but the words felt hollow, drowned by the pendant's silent promise. She hid it beneath her pallet, vowing to take it to the mid-hive's shrine come morning. The ecclesiarchy would know what to do. Surely a priest could cleanse whatever strangeness clung to the relic. But as she lay in the dark, the whispers returned, soft and insidious, promising a future where Terran would never know hunger, where the gang's torches would never touch them. Lyra's eyes burned with tears, not of fear, but of hope. A dangerous, forbidden hope that the Imperium had long since beaten out of her. Morning brought no relief. The sump's air was thicker, the distant vox sermons from the upper spires barely audible over the clamor of scavengers and the wail of the wounded. Lyra led Terran through the twisting alleys toward the mid-hive, the pendant hidden against her chest. Arbite's patrols roamed the thoroughfares, their visored gazes sweeping over the crowd. Lyra kept her head down, her hand on Terran's shoulder, but the pendant's warmth pulsed with every step, as if urging her onward. At the shrine's gates, a crowd of penitents begged for blessings, their voices drowned by a preacher's thunderous sermon. Lyra clutched the pendant, its whispers now a chorus in her mind, promising salvation if she kept it secret. Terran looked up at her, his eyes unnaturally bright, and whispered, "He's waiting, Mother. Don't tell them." The shrine loomed before her, its blackened spires a testament to the Emperor's unyielding judgment. Lyra's heart pounded, torn between duty and the pendant's seductive promise. She stepped forward, then hesitated, the weight of the Aquila pulling her back into the shadows. The mid-hive of Tertius was a labyrinth of rusted gantries and flickering lumens, where the air carried the sour tang of unwashed bodies and the faint incense of forgotten shrines. Lyra guided Terran through the crowded thoroughfares, her hand tied on his as they wove past emaciated workers and muttering pilgrims. The Aquila pendant hung heavy against her chest, hidden beneath her coat, its warmth a constant pulse that seemed to quicken with her heartbeat. The whispers had grown clearer since the sump, no longer just feelings but words, soft, insistent, promising safety if she trusted the winged shadow. Lyra's mind churned with doubt. She'd meant to surrender the relic at the shrine, to beg the ecclesiarchy's guidance. But Terran's words at the gates, "Don't tell them," had rooted her in place, her faith warring with a mother's desperate hope. Terran was quiet now, his small hand cold in hers, his eyes darting to shadows as if seeing things she couldn't. The hymn he'd hummed in the sump was gone, replaced by a silence that unnerved her more than his sleep talk. They passed a toppled statue of St. Drusus, its face defaced with gang runes, a reminder of the hive's decay. The ecclesiarchy's presence was thinning here. Sermons still blared from voxcasters, but the crowds ignored them, their faith eroded by hunger and fear. Lyra's own devotion felt like a fraying thread, stretched taut by years of unanswered prayers and the pendant's seductive voice. She clutched it through her coat, its heat seeping into her palm, whispering, "Keep me close, and he will live." At home, their hab was a crumbling cell in a derelict block, its walls scarred by promethium burns from the Reaver's last raid. Lyra's husband Gavrin sat hunched over a scavenged data slate, his face gaunt from missed rations. Once a mid-hive clerk, he'd been proud, his hands steady with a quill. But the manufactorum's closure had stripped him of purpose. Now his eyes were distant, haunted by dreams he wouldn't share. "You're late," he muttered, not looking up. Arbites were sniffing around. Said something about heresy in the sump. Lyra's stomach twisted. She hadn't told him about the pendant, fearing his judgment. She busied herself with their meager rations, moldy nutrient paste and a half canister of recycled water, while Terran sat silently, staring at the wall as if listening to something beyond her hearing. That night, as Gavrin slept fitfully, Lyra hid the pendant beneath a loose floor panel, its whispers quieter but no less insistent. She checked on Terran, finding him awake, his eyes gleaming in the chem lamp's glow. "He says you don't trust him," Terran whispered, his voice low and strange. "The winged shadow, he's angry." Lyra's breath caught, her hand trembling as she touched his forehead. No fever, yet his words chilled her. "Who's he, Taryn?" she asked, but he only smiled, a smile too old for his years, and turned away. Sleep eluded her, the pendant's voice creeping into her dreams. Visions of a burning cathedral, its spires wreathed in black flame, and a figure with wings of shadow promising Taryn's safety if she obeyed. Morning brought a wandering preacher to their hab block, his tattered robes emblazoned with the ecclesiarchy's seal. His voice boomed through a handheld vox, decrying heresy in the hive, his eyes scanning the crowd for signs of guilt. Lyra kept Taryn close, her heart pounding as the preacher's gaze lingered on them. The pendant burned against her skin, its whispers urging her to flee, to hide its existence. She wanted to confess, to thrust the relic into the preacher's hands and beg for absolution. But Taryn's grip tightened on her arm, his whisper sharp. "He'll kill us, Mother." "Don't." The preacher moved on, but his words lingered, warning of purges for those who strayed from the Emperor's light. Gavin grew worse that day, his dreams spilling into waking hours. He spoke of a cathedral ablaze, of voices calling him to kneel before a shadowed altar. Lyra recognized the visions, too close to her own, but fear kept her silent about the pendant. She caught Taryn staring at his father, his expression unreadable, and when she checked the floor panel, the pendant was gone. Panic seized her until she found it in Taryn's hands, his fingers tracing the strange markings as he hummed a melody that wasn't the Emperor's hymn. "He says Father's weak," Taryn murmured, his voice flat. "But we can save him. If you listen." Lyra snatched the pendant, its heat scalding, and hid it again, her mind screaming with questions she dared not voice. An Arbit's patrol swept the block that evening, their voxcasters blaring about a relic stolen from a shrine, its description too close to the pendant for coincidence. Lyra's hands shook as she prepared to flee, but the whispers promised safety if she stayed, if she trusted the winged shadow. Gavrin's mutterings grew louder, his eyes unfocused, and Taryn's silence felt like a judgment. The pendant's voice was a chorus now, drowning her prayers, pulling her deeper into its embrace. The mid-hive shrine was a crumbling monument to the Emperor's wrath, its blackened spires clawing at a sky choked with industrial smog. Lyra stood in the press of penitence, her hand clutching Taryn's as the crowd's murmurs mingled with the preacher's vox-amplified sermon. The pendant, hidden beneath her coat, burned against her chest, its whispers now a relentless tide. "Trust me, and he will live." She'd come to surrender it, to beg the ecclesiarchy to cleanse the taint she felt creeping through her family. But Taryn's words haunted her. "He'll kill us, Mother." The shrine's air was heavy with incense and desperation, the faithful begging for miracles in a hive that had forgotten hope. Lyra's faith, once a beacon, was now a flickering ember, eroded by the pendant's promises and the Imperium's silence. Taryn's small frame pressed against her, his eyes unnaturally bright, fixed on the shrine's altar, where a gilded aquila loomed, its eyes seeming to judge her. He hadn't spoken since dawn, but his silence carried a weight, as if he were listening to something she couldn't hear. Gavin had stayed behind, too weak to leave their hab, his dreams of a burning cathedral leaving him feverish and distant. Lyra's fingers twitched toward the pendant, its heat a pulse that matched the preacher's cadence, urging her to keep it hidden. She scanned the crowd, emaciated workers, hollow-eyed pilgrims, and a few Arbite enforcers watching for signs of heresy. The preacher's voice thundered, decrying those who harbored forbidden relics, and Lyra's heart pounded, certain he spoke of her. She pushed forward, determined to reach the altar, to confess and be free of the pendant's grip. The crowd parted reluctantly, their faces etched with suspicion. Taryn tugged at her hand, whispering, "He's watching, Mother." The winged shadow. His voice was cold, too precise, and Lyra's resolve faltered. At the altar, a junior priest in tattered vestments accepted offerings, scrap metal, ration cards, anything the faithful could spare. Lyra knelt, her hands trembling as she reached for the pendant. But the whispers surged, a cacophony of promises and threats. "Give me up, and Taryn dies." She froze, the priest's gaze locking onto her, his eyes narrowing as if sensing her guilt. "Speak, child of the Emperor," the priest said, his voice sharp. Lyra's throat tightened, the words of confession trapped by the pendant's heat. Taryn's grip tightened, his whisper urgent. "He'll burn us." Before she could respond, the sermon reached a crescendo, the preacher calling for the faithful to root out heresy. The crowd's fervor turned manic, and Lyra's panic erupted. She shouted, "I found it in the sump." "It speaks." The words tore from her, unbidden, the pendant's heat searing her skin. The crowd gasped, and the priest's face darkened, accusing her of blasphemy. Taryn pulled her back, his strength unnatural, as Arbites' enforcers pushed through the throng. Lyra fled, dragging Taryn into the shrine's shadowed alcoves, the pendant's whispers, now a scream, "Run, or they'll take him." The crowd's chants of "heretic" echoed behind them, and she stumbled through a side passage, its walls carved with faded imperial iconography. Taryn's voice broke through, chillingly calm. "The winged shadow says they're blind. They can't see him." Lyra's mind reeled. His words mirrored the pendant's, blurring the line between her son and the relic's influence. She clutched it tighter, its markings pulsing under her fingers, no longer static but writhing like living runes. They hid in a derelict scriptorium, its shelves littered with moldering parchments. Lyra's breath came in ragged gasps, the pendant's heat a fire in her chest. She wanted to hurl it away, to scream for the Emperor's mercy, but Taryn's eyes held her, bright, unblinking, as if he saw through her. "He says Father's too weak," Taryn murmured, his voice a monotone. "But we can save him. You just have to listen." Lyra's vision blurred with tears. Gavrin's worsening state, his visions of a shadowed altar, felt like a noose tightening around her family. She tried to pray, but the Emperor's words were drowned by the pendant's chorus, promising salvation if she obeyed. Footsteps echoed outside. A wandering preacher, his vox crackling with warnings of a relic thief. Lyra pressed herself against the wall, Taryn silent beside her, his hand tracing the air as if following the pendant's unseen influence. The preacher paused, his shadow looming through the scriptorium's broken door, and Lyra's heart stopped as he called out, "The Emperor sees all sinners." The pendant's whispers surged, urging her to act, to protect Taryn at any cost. She gripped a shard of broken plasteel, her mind fracturing under the weight of fear and devotion, ready to kill to keep her son safe. The scriptorium's shadows clung to Lyra like a shroud, the air thick with the dust of forgotten prayers and the metallic tang of her own fear. The pendant burned against her chest, its whispers, now a relentless command, save him or lose him forever. Taryn crouched beside her, his small frame unnaturally still, his eyes gleaming with a light that wasn't his own. The preacher's footsteps had faded, but the voxcasters outside blared accusations of heresy. The crowd's chants of "Purge the unclean" echoing through the mid-hive's decaying corridors. Lyra's hand trembled around the plasteel shard, her mind a battlefield, where faith and the pendant's promises tore at each other. She wanted to cast the relic away, to drag Taryn back to the shrine and beg for absolution, but its voice drowned her prayers, insisting that only it could protect her son from the hive's collapse and the Emperor's unyielding judgment. They slipped back to their hab under cover of darkness. The pendant's heat guiding Lyra through alleys choked with ash and despair. Gavrin was worse, slumped against the wall, his skin clammy and his eyes unfocused, muttering about a cathedral wreathed in black flame. "He calls me," Gavrin rasped, his voice barely human. "The winged shadow. He demands sacrifice." Lyra's heart twisted. His words mirrored Terran's. The pendant's influence weaving through her family like a contagion. She checked the floor panel where she'd hidden the relic, but it was already in Terran's hands, his fingers tracing its writhing runes as he hummed a melody that twisted the Emperor's hymns into something profane. "He says Father's too weak," Terran whispered, his voice cold. "But you can save us, Mother. You have to give." The pendant's whispers surged, painting visions of Terran safe, fed, and free from the hive's horrors. But only if she obeyed. Lyra's mind fractured under the weight of its demands, her faith in the Emperor crumbling against the primal need to protect her son. She knelt beside Gavrin, her hand shaking as she touched his fevered brow. "What does it want?" she asked Terran, her voice breaking. He didn't answer, only pointed to the pendant, its surface now pulsing with a faint, sickly light. The whispers became a command, blood for salvation. Lyra recoiled, but the image of Terran starving, of Arbit's dragging him to the pyres, overwhelmed her. She saw no mercy in the Imperium, only the cold calculus that had abandoned Hive Tertius to its fate. In the dead of night, Lyra led Gavrin to a ruined chapel deep in the Hab block, its altar defaced but still bearing the Emperor's faded visage. The pendant's voice guided her, its heat searing her palm as she clutched it. Terran followed silent, his eyes fixed on the relic as if it were his true mother. Gavrin, delirious, mumbled prayers that turned into pleas to the winged shadow. Lyra's heart screamed against what she was about to do, but the pendant's promise was absolute, his blood for Terran's life. She raised the plasteel shard, tears streaming down her face, and drove it into Gavrin's chest. His gasp was soft, his eyes wide with betrayal, then empty. Blood pooled on the altar, and the pendant's light flared, its whispers a triumphant chorus. Terran watched, unmoving, as Lyra sobbed, the relic's warmth now a fire that consumed her guilt. But the promise was a lie. Terran's voice changed, no longer her son's but a guttural chant in a tongue that twisted her soul. Words of alien cadence, sharp and sibilant, like blades on bone. The pendant's runes glowed, their spirals forming eyes that stared into her. And Lyra realized the winged shadow wasn't the Emperor's light, but something ancient, something that fed on her despair. She screamed, clutching Terran, but his skin was cold, his eyes vacant except for that unnatural gleam. The chapel's walls seemed to pulse, the air thick with a presence that mocked her sacrifice. Footsteps echoed outside, Arbit's, drawn by reports of a ritual in the Hab block. The Vox casters named her a heretic, her family damned. Lyra fled, dragging Terran into the Underhive's depths, the pendant still clutched in her hand, its whispers now mocking her pain. The Ecclesiarchy's enforcers pursued, their torches cutting through the darkness, blind to the relic's true nature. Terran's chants grew louder, his words no longer human, and Lyra's mind teetered on the edge of madness. She'd killed Gavrin for nothing, her faith and family shattered by the things she'd trusted to save them. The Underhive swallowed them, its tunnels a maze of rust and rot, and the pendant's voice promised one last chance, if she gave everything to the winged shadow. The Underhive of Tertius was a tomb of rust and shadow, its tunnels a labyrinth where hope went to die. Lyra stumbled through the darkness, Terran's cold hand in hers, the Aquila pendant a searing weight against her chest. Its whispers had become a cacophony, no longer promising salvation, but demanding her surrender to the winged shadow. The air was thick with the stench of decay and promethium. The distant roar of gang wars mingling with the relentless voxcasters branding her a heretic. Gavrin's blood still stained her hands. His betrayal a wound deeper than the plasteel shard she'd driven into his heart. Terran's chants filled the silence, his voice a guttural litany of alien syllables that tore at Lyra's sanity, each word a reminder of the lie she'd believed. The pendant's runes pulsed with malevolent light, their spiraling eyes watching her, judging her, as if the Emperor himself had turned away. They hid in a collapsed sump chamber, its walls slick with industrial runoff. The faint hum of failing machinery, the only sound beyond Terran's chanting. Lyra's breath came in ragged gasps, her mind fracturing under the weight of her actions. She'd killed Gavrin, her husband of 15 years, for a promise that had damned them all. Terran sat across from her, his small frame hunched, his eyes glowing with that unnatural light. No longer her son, but a vessel for something ancient and cruel. "He sees us, Mother," he whispered, his voice layered with a presence that made her skin crawl. The winged shadow. "He's here." Lyra clutched the pendant, its heat now a torment, and tried to pray, but the Emperor's words were ash in her mouth, drowned by the relic's voice. "You are mine." The truth clawed its way through her despair. The pendant wasn't a holy relic, but a chaos-tainted artifact, its winged shadow a demon that fed on her suffering. The markings weren't imperial, but profane, etched by hands that served the ruinous powers. She saw it now. The visions of the burning cathedral, Terran's chants, Gavrin's fevered pleas, all manipulations to break her faith and bind her to its will. She wanted to hurl the pendant into the sump's depths, to scream for the Emperor's mercy. But the demon's voice held her fast, promising Terran's soul if she obeyed one final command. Lyra's tears fell, mixing with the filth on the floor as she realized her son was already lost. Footsteps echoed in the tunnel, a purge squad, their torches casting jagged shadows. The voxcasters blared her name, accusing her of witchcraft and murder, promising execution for her sins. Lyra's grip tightened on Terran, but he pulled away, his chant rising to a fevered pitch, the air around him shimmering with unnatural energy. The pendant's light flared and the chamber seemed to writhe, its walls pulsing like flesh. The demon revealed itself, not in form, but in feeling, a suffocating weight of malice that stripped away her last shred of hope. "Give yourself," it whispered, "and he will be free." Lyra's scream was silent, her mind collapsing as she saw Terran's face twist, his features blurring into something not human, his eyes endless voids. She stumbled to her feet, dragging Terran toward a derelict Vox relay at the chamber's edge, its ancient machinery still flickering with emergency power. The purge squad was close, their boots ringing on the tunnel floor, their laser guns humming. Lyra's hands shook as she activated the relay, her voice breaking as she broadcast a warning across the hive's failing network. "The Aquila lies. It's chaos, not salvation. Don't trust the shadows." The pendant burned, its screams drowning her words, but she kept speaking, pouring her guilt and horror into the Vox, knowing it would change nothing. The Imperium didn't care for her truth. Her suffering was a footnote. Her family, a statistic in the Emperor's calculus. The purge squad breached the chamber, their torches blinding, their voices cold as they ordered her to kneel. Terran's chanting stopped, his body slumping as if the demon had abandoned him, leaving only a hollow shell. Lyra dropped the pendant, its light fading as it hit the floor, but the damage was done. The squad's leader, a faceless Arbites in carapace armor, declared her sentence: death for heresy. Lyra didn't resist as they bound her, her eyes fixed on Terran's lifeless form, his soul stolen by the thing she'd trusted. The demon's laughter echoed in her mind, a final mockery of her faith. As they dragged her toward the pyres, the hive's vox crackled with her warning, quickly silenced by the ecclesiarchy's censors. Hive Tertius would burn, its people blind to the chaos seeping through its relics, and Lyra's sacrifice would mean nothing. The Emperor's mercy was a lie, and her suffering, like countless others, was noted but denied. Note: inspired by rumors of chaos-tainted relics circulating in the underhives of the Calixis sector, suppressed by ecclesiarchical purges. The middle hive of Turs was a corpse of industry, its once thrumming manufactorums now silent tombs choked with ash and rust. Garvin Hask led his family through the abandoned thoroughfares, his boots crunching on drifts of manufacturing waste, the air heavy with the acrid tang of promethium and despair. Once foreman of Manufactorum Block 7 Delta, responsible for 317 souls, crafting munitions for the Imperial Guard, Garvin was now a shadow of that man, his identity reduced to a worn multi-tool and the weight of keeping his wife, Marina, and brother-in-law, Doin, alive. 3 days ago, the Ashbourne Reavers had torched their hab block in a turf war with the Ferric Fangs, reducing 16 years of careful existence to ash. They'd fled with what they could carry: Marina's Medikey kit, Doan's tattered flak vest, and Garvin's water purification tablets. Pathetic relics of a life the Imperium had abandoned. The wide avenues designed for shift changes of thousands stretched empty save for toppled statues of Imperial heroes, their bronze faces defaced by scavengers or gangs. The central spire loomed in the distance, a tarnished needle against a polluted sky, its promise of authority a fading lie. Garvin's eyes scanned the shadows, every flicker a potential threat. The Arbites had withdrawn to the upper spires months ago when tithe quotas failed, leaving the hive to devour itself. Marina walked close, her Medikey kit slung over her shoulder, her face set in the same determined mask she'd worn in the public dispensary before its closure. Doan limped behind, his old PDF instincts sharp despite the infection gnawing at his leg, a wound from a collapsed hab bridge 2 days prior. They paused at the ruins of the Grand Mercantile Exchange, its shattered stained glass windows depicting the Emperor's bounty now littering the floor in shards. Garvin's heart ached for the hive's lost pride, where he'd once overseen production reports, believing in the Imperium's order. Now, moldering ledgers and broken data slates were all that remained. Doan signaled a halt, his hand on his stub revolver, pointing to a shadowed alcove where a figure moved. A water merchant emerged, hands raised, his cart holding 3 containers of cloudy liquid. His tattered coat bore the insignia of a guild hydrologist, his eyes darting with a nervous tick. Garvin offered a power cell, rare currency now, and the merchant's hands shook as he took it, whispering a warning. The gangs aren't fighting anymore. They're allied, cleansing the hive level by level. The merchant's words carried a weight beyond survival. He spoke of organized squads, executions with military precision, not the chaotic violence of underhive scum. They're coming for everyone, he hissed, his voice breaking. The upper spires. They're directing it. Garvin's stomach twisted, the implications too vast to grasp. The merchant fled into the darkness, his cart rattling, leaving Garvin with more than cloudy water, a seed of dread that the Imperium's neglect was no accident. Marina's hand found his, her grip steady despite the fear in her eyes. Doan's face was grim, his military mind already piecing together patterns Garvin couldn't yet see. They moved on, the merchant's warning urging them toward the upper spire, where some semblance of order might remain. Night fell, absolute in a hive without lumens, and they found shelter in a gutted factorum office. its reinforced doors a fragile barrier. Marina tended Duan's leg by chem lamp, her antiseptics nearly gone, her hands steady as she fought the infection threatening her brother. Garvin watched, clutching his multi-tool, the weight of his former life slipping away. The hive's collapse wasn't just gangs or starvation. It was something methodical, something that made his family's survival a defiance of an unseen plan. The distant crack of gunfire reminded him the cleansing was coming, and the upper spires, once a symbol of hope, now felt like a trap waiting to close. The middle hive's thoroughfares were a graveyard of industry, their silence broken only by the distant clatter of collapsing gantries and the occasional scream swallowed by the dark. Garvin Husky led Marina and Duane through the maze of abandoned streets, their steps cautious on the ash-slicked ferrocrete. The air stung with the bitter reek of chemical runoff, and the faint vox casts from the upper spires, promising aid that never came, mocked their struggle. The water merchant's warning echoed in Garvin's mind. The gangs are allied, cleansing the hive. His multi-tool hung heavy at his belt, a relic of his days as foreman, useless against the dread coiling in his gut. Marina's Medicae kit bounced against her hip, her face a mask of resolve, while Doan limped behind, his flak vest creaking, his stub revolver gripped tight despite the fever glazing his eyes. They navigated the ruins of a commercia district, its stalls stripped bare, the air thick with the ghosts of bartered lives. Garvin's map, scratched onto his old work authorization card, guided them toward a service tunnel that might bypass the gang-controlled thoroughfares. The merchant's words gnawed at him. Organized squads, executions, the upper spire's involvement. It was too precise for underhive scum, too systematic for a hive collapsing under its own weight. Marina's hand brushed his, her touch grounding him as they ducked beneath a fallen Aquila statue, its wings hacked off for scrap. "We keep moving," she whispered, her voice steady despite the fear lurking in her eyes. Doan scanned the shadows, his PDF instincts catching something Garvin missed. A flicker of movement in a shattered storefront. A figure emerged, hands raised, his guild merchant robes tattered but marked with the hydrologist's seal. His face was gaunt, gold teeth missing, his eyes wild with terror. "I know you," he rasped, recognizing Garvin's foreman badge. "Hasque, 7 Delta, you're not safe here." Garvin tensed, his hand on his multi-tool, but the merchant's desperation stayed his suspicion. "They're not just gangs," the man continued, his voice a frantic whisper. "The Reavers, the Fangs, they're armed, organized. The upper spires are directing them, processing people." He produced a cracked data slate, its screen flickering with administratum records. Orders stamped with the Adeptus Munitorum seal, detailing population redistribution and resource quotas. Garvin's blood ran cold. The merchant's truth confirmed the hive's collapse was no accident, but a calculated purge. Marina scanned the slate, her Medicaid training parsing the bureaucratic jargon with chilling clarity. "They're harvesting us," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Not just culling, collecting." Duan's expression darkened, his military mind recognizing patterns of containment and extermination. Before Garvin could press the merchant further, a burst of stubber fire erupted from the shadows. The merchant gasped, 3 rounds tearing through his chest, his data slate clattering to the ground. Garvin grabbed it as Doan dragged Marina behind a collapsed stall, las fire scorching the air where they'd stood. The attackers wore the ash-smeared markings of the ferric fangs, but their movements were disciplined, their vox units crackling with orders in a clipped military cadence. Garvin's heart pounded as they fled into a maintenance tunnel. The data slate clutched tight, its weight heavier than the multi-tool at his belt. The tunnel's walls were slick with condensation, the air thick with rust and despair. Doan's leg wound slowed him, blood seeping through Marina's makeshift bandage. But his revolver stayed ready, his eyes scanning for pursuit. The Fang's footsteps faded, their vox calls echoing with reports of targets acquired. Garvin's mind raced, the merchant's words painting a nightmare. The gangs weren't just seizing territory. They were tools of the spires, purging the hive with cold efficiency. The data slate's records burned in his thoughts, names, numbers, entire hab blocks marked for processing. They collapsed in a shadowed alcove, the tunnel's faint emergency lighting casting Doan's fevered face in stark relief. Marina checked his wound, her hands trembling as she rationed their last antiseptic. "We need the upper levels," she said, her voice firm despite the strain. "If there's any chance of answers, it's there." Garvin nodded, the data slate's evidence a burning weight in his pack. The merchant's truth had cost his life, and Garvin felt the noose of the hive's fate tightening. The cleansing wasn't chaos, it was order, an imperial machine grinding terrors to dust. As they moved deeper into the tunnel, the distant hum of machinery grew louder, a reminder that something still functioned in this dying world, something that wanted them gone. The maintenance tunnels beneath hive terrors were a suffocating maze of rust and shadow, their air thick with the stench of stagnant effluent and corroded metal. Garvin Hasqua led Marina and Doan through the narrow passages. The data slate's system. The maintenance tunnels beneath hive terrors were a suffocating maze of rust and shadow, their air thick with the stench of stagnant effluent and corroded metal. Garvin Hask led Marina and Doan through the narrow passages. The data slate's weight, a constant reminder of the merchant's chilling truth. The hive's collapse was a deliberate purge orchestrated by the upper spires. Its flickering screen, now tucked in Garvin's pack, held administratum orders for population redistribution, a euphemism that twisted his gut with dread. The tunnel's walls seemed to close in, the faint hum of emergency power strips casting jagged shadows, amplifying the claustrophobia of their flight. Marina's Medikey kit rattled softly, her hands steady but her eyes haunted, while Doan's limp grew worse, his infected leg leaving a faint trail of blood. Each step toward the upper levels felt like defiance against a machine that had already deemed them expendable. They emerged into a vast drainage chamber, a cavernous relic of the hive's once mighty infrastructure, its walls rising 50 meters to a ceiling studded with defunct machinery. A stagnant pool of filth dominated the floor, islands of debris breaking its oily surface, the air burning their lungs with chemical fumes. Garvin's eyes caught a glint of new metal along one wall, rows of collection pods, their surfaces pristine amidst the decay, each the size of a cargo container, with transparent panels and drainage systems feeding into receptacles stamped with the Adeptus Munitorum's seal. Doan motioned for them to stay low, his revolver raised, his fevered gaze sharp despite his pain. The pods hummed with active power, their restraint systems, medical grade, designed for violent patients, visible through the panels. Marina's Medikey training kicked in. She examined a receptacle, her fingers tracing its classification codes, her face paling. "These aren't for waste," she whispered. "They're harvesting biological material. Blood, tissue, maybe more." Garvin's stomach churned, the data slate's orders taking shape in his mind. The pods weren't for storage, but for processing human lives, reducing them to resources for the Imperium's war machine. The receptacle's alphanumeric codes matched those from Marina's dispensary days, but their purpose was colder, more methodical than any black market organ trade. The merchant's warning, "They're cleansing the hive," now carried a horrifying clarity. This was no random collapse, but a systematic harvest. Doan pointed out the precision of the pod's installation, their connections to a central control panel still active, suggesting recent, deliberate work. "This is Imperial," he growled, his PDF instincts recognizing military efficiency. "Someone's running this like a campaign." The distant echo of voices through the tunnels cut their inspection short. Gang members, their Vox units crackling with orders, their footsteps too disciplined for Underhive scum. Garvin's heart pounded as they scrambled up a corroded maintenance ladder to a higher level, the climb agonizing, with Doan's wound slowing him. Marina went first, her strength hauling him up while Garvin supported from below. Each groan from Doan, a reminder of their dwindling time. The ladder led to a network of service tunnels behind the central processing sector, where glimpses through ventilation grates revealed abandoned workstations once used for cataloging TER's industrial output. The pods below haunted Garvin, images of citizens, neighbors, reduced to raw material, their lives weighed and found wanting by the Emperor's calculus. In a moment of necessity, Garvin scouted ahead alone, leaving Marina to tend Deween's worsening infection in a hidden alcove. The tunnel narrowed toward the primary distribution hub, a nexus where resources once flowed to the Hive's sectors. Through a grate, he saw a nightmare. The hub repurposed into a processing facility, examination tables staffed by gang members under the direction of figures in unmarked carapace armor. Citizens, emaciated, terrified, were sorted with clinical precision, some herded into sealed containers like those in the bazaar, others executed with single shots to the head, their bodies fed to a chute leading back to the drainage chamber. The armored figures moved with military discipline, their featureless helmets hiding any trace of humanity, their anonymity screaming official sanction. Garvin's breath caught as he recognized a face among the gang workers. Thorn Merrick, a former colleague from 7 Delta, now directing the slaughter with casual brutality. The betrayal cut deeper than the horror, proof that TER's collapse had turned neighbor against neighbor in service of a merciless machine. The service tunnels twisted like veins through the dying heart of Hive TERs, their walls slick with condensation and the acrid residue of neglect. Garvin Haskey crawled back to Marina and Deween, his mind reeling from the horrors glimpsed in the distribution hub. Thorn Merrick, a man he'd shared meals with, now a cog in a machine that processed citizens like raw ore. The data slate in his pack burned with the merchant's truth, orders from the Adeptus Munitorum to harvest TER's population, its people reduced to quotas in the Imperium's relentless calculus. The air in the tunnel was heavy, a faint hum of failing systems, a dirge for a world abandoned. Marina knelt beside Doan in the alcove, her Medici kit open, her hands stained with his blood as she fought the infection spreading from his leg wound. Her face was a mask of focus, but her eyes betrayed the grief she couldn't voice. Dewin's breathing was shallow, his fevered gaze fixed on the tunnel's shadows, his revolver still clutched despite his weakening grip. "We can't stay," Garvin whispered, his voice hoarse from the chemical air. The hub's processing facility was too close, its armored overseers and gang enforcers a heartbeat away from finding them. The data slate's evidence, directives for biomass reclamation and processing centers, confirmed. The cleansing was no gang war, but an imperial operation, methodical and merciless. Marina nodded, packing her kit with mechanical precision, but Doan's condition slowed them to a crawl. His leg, torn open during their escape from the ferric fangs, oozed through her bandages, the infection a death sentence without proper Medicaid supplies. Garvin's map, scratched on his old authorization card, pointed to a security bulkhead ahead, a barrier to the administrative levels where resources might still exist. But the sounds of pursuit, vox crackles and disciplined footsteps, grew closer, the gang's newfound organization a chilling echo of the hub's efficiency. They reached a sealed bulkhead, its access panel blinking with authorization codes they didn't have. Beyond, the hum of active machinery suggested a guarded area, likely crawling with enforcers. Duan's military instincts took over, his fevered eyes scanning for alternatives. He pointed to a ventilation shaft above, wide enough to fit them, leading upward toward what might be environmental controls. The ascent was grueling, the shaft's narrow confines amplifying Doan's suppressed groans as his wound tore further. Marina climbed first, her strength hauling him up, while Garvin pushed from below, every meter a battle against exhaustion and fear. The shaft opened into a secondary processing area, smaller but no less horrific than the hub below. Medical servitors moved between examination stations, their augmetic limbs extracting organs from unconscious citizens. Preservation units stamped with Mechanicus seals, humming beside tables, where limbs were fitted with neural implants for servitor conversion. Garvin's stomach lurched, the sight confirming the data slate's grim truth. Ter's people were being disassembled, their bodies repurposed for the Imperium's war machine. Faces he recognized. Workers from 7 Delta, neighbors from their hab block, lay on tables, their humanity stripped away with mechanical precision. Marina's hand gripped his, her Medicae training unable to shield her from the horror, her whisper barely audible. "This is what they're doing to us." Before they could retreat, an alarm klaxon screamed, bathing the chamber in pulsing red light. Vox announcements barked of a containment breach, security forces mobilizing. Whether their presence had triggered it or another disturbance had drawn attention, the result was the same. Time was running out. Duan's face hardened, his PDF training cutting through his fever. He pointed to an emergency evacuation route marked on the wall, a path for personnel escaping system failures, leading toward the administrative levels. But as they moved, a security patrol rounded the corner. 5 enforcers in carapace armor, led by a figure bearing the Ashbourne Reavers markings, their discipline betraying Imperial training. Doan acted without hesitation, pushing Garvin and Marina into a recessed doorway, and stepping into the corridor, his revolver raised. "Go," he hissed, his voice steady despite his pain. Garvin's heart stopped as Doan fired, the stubber's crack echoing, drawing the patrol's attention. Last fire answered, searing the air, and Doan's groans became shouts of defiance, his sacrifice buying them seconds. Marina lunged to help, but Garvin held her back, his grip bruising, knowing Doan's choice was final. The patrol pursued him, their Vox units crackling with reports of a lone resistor, leaving the corridor clear. Garvin dragged Marina toward the evacuation route, her face a mask of suppressed grief, her body trembling with the weight of her brother's loss. The shaft led upward, each glimpse through observation ports revealing more horrors. Chambers of servitor conversions, stasis vaults of preserved organs, all feeding the Imperium's hunger. Garvin clutched the data slate, its evidence now a burden he couldn't abandon. Proof that Terrors wasn't failing, but being harvested. Doan's sacrifice burned in his chest, a debt he couldn't repay, pushing him toward the upper levels where answers or damnation awaited. The evacuation shaft spat Garvin and Marina into a derelict administratum records facility, a hollow shell of bureaucracy, where dust-covered data slates and silent cogitators bore witness to Ter's betrayal. The air was cleaner here, the faint hum of active climate controls, a cruel reminder of the upper levels' preserved order, luxury denied to the hive's lower depths. Garvin's hands trembled, clutching the merchant's data slate, its screen still flickering with evidence of the Imperium's harvest. orders to process Ter's population, to strip its people for labor, servitors, or raw biomass. Marina moved with mechanical precision, checking Dwayne's pack for supplies, her face a mask of grief hardened by survival. His sacrifice in the processing chamber, a diversion that saved them from the patrol, hung between them, unspoken but heavy, his blood a debt they carried toward the upper spires. The facility's halls were eerily intact, emergency lighting casting long shadows over abandoned workstations. No scavengers had touched this place. The evacuation had been deliberate, not desperate. Garvin's mental map placed them in the upper mid-hive, where bureaucrats once tallied Ters's industrial output. Now, the chambers served a darker purpose. They found a repurposed assessment room, its examination tables gleaming with sterile efficiency, diagnostic equipment humming with active power. Marina's Medicae eyes scanned the setup, her voice low. These are for categorizing humans, not healing them. Beyond, transparent cylinders lined a chamber, some holding citizens in amniotic suspension. Neural probes piercing their skulls, their faces frozen in terror. Garvin recognized mid-level workers, foremen, clerks, people like him, deemed valuable enough for preservation, not slaughter. The data slate's records aligned with the horror. Edict 7729 Gamma, issued 3 years prior, reclassified Ters as a resource extraction world. Its population, a commodity to be harvested. The collapse, the Mechanicus's withdrawal, the supply shortages, the PDF's redeployment, was engineered to maximize efficiency, culling the hive while extracting its human wealth. Garvin's faith in the Imperium, already frayed, shattered as he read the cold metrics. 78.3% assessment completion, 12,457 viable specimens. A vast chamber beyond revealed the final truth: hundreds of servitors, their human components stripped of identity, processed data at cogitator stations. Among them, Garvin saw Tiberol, a logistics clerk, Madame Vos, a teacher, Foreman Drust, his augmetic hand still gleaming. Their humanity was gone, repurposed for the Emperor's machine. A commotion broke their trance, armored boots echoing through the halls. Garvin and Marina slipped into a storage closet, its shelves stocked with mundane bureaucratic relics. The data slate's light illuminated Marina's face, her hands trembling as she scrolled through manifests detailing labor reassignments, servitor conversions, and organ harvesting for off-world transport. The voices outside grew closer, a security sweep moving with military precision. Garvin's stolen gang insignia, crude reaver markings on his coat, fooled the patrol in the dim light, their cursory glance mistaking them for enforcers. As the boots faded, they fled to a security monitoring station, its screens tracking the hive's cleansing. Images showed combat servitors purging resistance in the lower levels, transport vessels loading human cargo at the spaceport, and a Mechanicus ship marked for biological components. Marina accessed the station's Vox unit, her dispensary experience guiding her fingers over the controls. The enforcement channels revealed the operation's final phase. Atmospheric systems would be disabled, suffocating the lower hive to save resources. A transport for specialized labor, Medici personnel included, was departing in 6 hours. Garvin saw a chance for Marina, her credentials a ticket to survival, but his own skills were obsolete. Her silent refusal, her hand gripping his, rejected the idea of leaving him. Alarms screamed, signaling a breach in the lower levels. Organized resistance, not desperate survivors, fighting back. The patrols redeployed, leaving a gap in spaceport security. They moved through abandoned corridors, stolen uniforms granting fleeting legitimacy. At the spaceport, Garvin traded the data slate's cache locations, stockpiles from his foreman days, for passage. The officer, eager for commendation, expedited them to a specialized transport. Marina's Medicaid credentials passed scrutiny, but Garvin's were rejected. His skills held no value. In a final act, he pressed the data slate into Marina's hands, its evidence their only weapon. She was guided aboard, her eyes locking with his, a silent vow unbroken. Garvin was escorted to a holding area for processing, but a distraction, a resistance attack, allowed him to slip into a communications center. There, on a functioning Vox unit, Garvin recorded his testimony, uploading it to every channel. Turs is being harvested, not abandoned. The Imperium betrays us. The transmission would be silenced, but he hoped someone would hear. As patrols closed in, he fled toward the lower levels, joining the doomed resistance. The Emperor's calculus had weighed his world and found it wanting, his suffering noted but denied, a statistic in an uncaring machine. Note: inspired by reports of controlled population reductions in the Calixis sector, buried in Administratum archives.